What if I told you that the only thing standing between you and the wealth you've always dreamed of isn't your education, your connections, or even your current bank account, but something far simpler, far more invisible, and yet infinitely more powerful? Right now, in this very moment, there's a secret operating in your life. It's been there all along, quietly shaping every financial decision you make, every opportunity you see or miss, every risk you take or avoid. And here's what makes it so extraordinary. 99% of people will go their entire lives without ever discovering it. They'll work hard, chase goals, read books, attend seminars, and yet this one fundamental truth will remain hidden from them, tucked away in plain sight, like a key they walk past every single day. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Now, I want you to think about something for a moment. Has this ever happened to you? You've set a goal, maybe a financial target or a business dream, and you've thrown yourself into it with everything you have. You've done the research, put in the hours, made the sacrifices, and yet, despite all that effort, the results just don't come, or they come briefly, then slip away. Meanwhile, you watch others, people who don't seem to work any harder than you, who don't have any special advantages, and somehow they're thriving. They're building wealth, creating opportunities, living the life you've been chasing. And you're left with this gnawing question that keeps you up at night. What do they know that I don't? Here's the truth that nobody tells you. It's not about working harder. It's not about another strategy, another course, another guru's 5-step system. What separates those who build real, lasting wealth from those who stay stuck in the cycle of trying and struggling is something that operates at a much deeper level. It's not external. It's internal. It's not learned in a classroom or from a book. It's awakened from within. And the most frustrating part? You've had access to it all along, but your mind has been programmed to look everywhere except the one place where the real power lives. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might completely shift how you think about money, success, and your own potential. This isn't about positive thinking or manifesting. This isn't about working yourself to exhaustion or taking wild risks. This is about understanding a fundamental principle that, once you truly grasp it, changes everything. And I mean everything, because here's what makes this secret so profound. It's already operating in your life right now. The question is whether it's working for you or against you. Most people, without even realizing it, have unknowingly set this powerful force in opposition to their own dreams. They're pushing the gas pedal and the brake at the same time, wondering why they're not moving forward. But once you understand how to align this internal force with what you truly want, think about this for a moment. There's a reason you're here watching this right now. Out of millions of videos you could have clicked on, thousands of distractions competing for your attention, something drew you to this. A message. That's not coincidence. That's your internal system recognizing something it needs to hear. You're standing at what I call the edge of transformation, that uncomfortable electric space where part of you knows you're ready for something different, even if another part of you is terrified of what that might mean. Here's what most people don't realize about this edge. It's not a place of weakness. It's actually the most powerful position you can occupy. Because this secret I'm talking about, this hidden truth about wealth and abundance, it doesn't reveal itself to people who are comfortable. It doesn't show up for those who are perfectly content with where they are. It only unveils itself to those who are standing right where you are now, feeling that mixture of frustration and hunger, knowing there's more but not quite seeing how to reach it. That tension you're feeling, that's not a sign you're doing something wrong. That's the signal that you're ready. Let me share something with you that changed everything for me. Imagine for a moment that your mind is like a deep, immense river. Stay with this image because it's crucial. Most people spend their entire lives on the surface of this river. They see the sunlight dancing on the water, the ripples and waves, maybe a few fish jumping, and they think that's all there is. They think wealth is about what you can see, the money in your account, the car you drive, the house you live in. They chase those surface reflections, trying to grab them, control them, make them stay, and they wonder why it feels like trying to hold water in their hands. But here's the revelation. Beneath that surface, far below where most people ever look, there's a current, a powerful, silent, unstoppable current that determines where everything flows. This current is your true mind, your deep identity, the vibrational frequency you're operating on without even knowing it. And this is where wealth actually originates. Not on the surface with the techniques and tactics and strategies everyone talks about. Those things matter, sure, but they're downstream effects. The real power, the real source, is in that deep current beneath. The select few who build lasting wealth, the ones who seem to attract opportunities, who make decisions that consistently work out, who have what looks like luck but really isn't. They've learned to feel that current. They've stopped living on the surface and started operating from the depths. They've discovered that wealth isn't something you chase or capture. It's something you become aligned with at a fundamental level. It's a frequency you tune into, like adjusting a radio dial until suddenly the static clears and you hear the music that was there all along. If this resonated with you, subscribe to this channel. This is where we explore the real mechanics of transformation, not just surface-level motivation. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because understanding this concept intellectually is one thing, but actually experiencing how it operates in your daily life is something entirely different. That internal current I'm describing, it's active right now. As you're listening to these words, it's either pulling you toward the life you want or keeping you anchored in the patterns you're trying to escape. And here's what makes this so fascinating. Most people have never consciously directed this current. They inherited it from their parents, absorbed it from their environment, adopted it from their early experiences, and then spent decades wondering why their life keeps flowing in the same direction, no matter how hard they paddle against it. The transformation begins the moment you recognize you have the power to change that current. Not through force, not through grinding harder, but through a shift in your internal state that ripples out into everything you touch. This is about identity, about vibration, about becoming the kind of person that wealth naturally flows toward, instead of someone who's constantly swimming upstream. Write in the comments, "I feel the current changing," if this resonates with what you're experiencing right now. Here's what I've observed watching thousands of people try to build wealth, and it's honestly heartbreaking because the pattern is so consistent. They wake up every morning and immediately jump into action mode. They're chasing opportunities, hunting for the next method, the next strategy, the next breakthrough technique that's going to finally be the one that works. They're reading books, taking courses, networking with the right people, doing all the things they're supposed to do. And I'm not saying those things are worthless, they're not. But here's the problem, they're all surface-level activities. They're all happening on top of that river we talked about, while the current beneath is still flowing in the same direction it always has. It's like someone standing on a moving walkway at the airport, trying to run in the opposite direction. They're putting in enormous effort, they're exhausted, they're doing everything right according to the books and the gurus, but they're either staying in the same place or moving backward. And the tragedy is, they never stop to question the walkway itself. They never think to step off and change the direction of the force that's actually moving them. This is where most people spend their entire lives. They become experts at surface-level adjustments. They switch jobs, try new business ideas, cut expenses, work longer hours, hustle harder. but none of it addresses the fundamental issue, the deep current of their identity, their beliefs about themselves, their vibrational frequency around money and success. That internal programming is still running the same old code, producing the same old results, just with different window dressing. The real revelation comes when you understand something that sounds almost too simple to be true. Wealth doesn't show up when you chase it. I know that goes against everything you've been taught. We're conditioned to believe that success comes from pursuit, from hunting down opportunities, from aggressive action and relentless hustle. And while action matters, there's something that matters infinitely more. You have to become the person that wealth is attracted to. Not through pretending, not through fake it till you make it affirmations, but through a genuine internal shift in who you are at your core. Think about a magnet for a second. A magnet doesn't run around trying to convince metal to stick to it. A magnet doesn't work harder on some days and less on others. A magnet doesn't worry about whether it's worthy of attracting metal or if it has the right credentials. A magnet simply is what it is. It exists in a state of magnetic force, and by virtue of that state, metal moves toward it naturally, effortlessly, inevitably. The magnet isn't doing anything. The magnet is simply being something. That's the paradigm shift that changes everything. You're not here to chase wealth. You're here to become someone whose internal state, whose vibration, whose identity is aligned with abundance. And when that alignment happens, opportunities don't have to be hunted. They appear. Money doesn't have to be forced. It flows. Success doesn't have to be manufactured. It emerges as a natural byproduct of who you've become. But here's where people get stuck, and I want to address this directly because it might be exactly where you are right now. You hear this idea about becoming rather than chasing, and part of your mind says, yes, that makes sense, while another part says, but how? How do I become that person when my bank account is telling me a different story? How do I shift my internal state when my external circumstances are screaming limitation at me every single day? This is the journey we're on together right now, because the answer isn't what you think. It's not about ignoring reality or living in denial. It's about understanding that your current reality is simply the echo of who you used to be. It's the result of yesterday's identity, last month's beliefs, last year's vibration. What you're seeing now is always old news. The question is, what identity are you building today that will create tomorrow's reality? The people who crack this code, who figure out how to live from that deep current instead of the surface chaos, they discover something extraordinary. Life stops feeling like a fight. Decisions become clearer. The right people show up at the right time. Resources appear when needed. It's not magic, it's alignment. It's the natural consequence of becoming someone who vibrates at the same frequency as what they desire. Drop a comment saying, I'm becoming magnetic, if you're ready to shift from chasing to attracting. Let me show you why this is so difficult for most people, and why you might have been unknowingly sabotaging yourself without even realizing it. There's a fundamental error that runs so deep in our conditioning that it's almost invisible. It's like trying to see the frames of a movie while you're watching it. The illusion is so seamless that you don't notice the individual pieces creating the experience. Here's what happens. Someone decides they want wealth. They set a goal. They get motivated. They start taking action. But if you could zoom in and examine the internal state they're operating from while they're taking all that action, you'd see something fascinating and tragic. They're vibrating lack. Every cell in their body is humming with the frequency of not enough. They're working from a place of fear. Fear that they won't make it. Fear that they'll run out of time. Fear that they're not capable. Fear that they'll fail like they've failed before. And this internal state of scarcity is like trying to fill a bucket that has a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it keeps draining out. You can't build abundance from a foundation of lack. It's energetically impossible. It's like trying to grow a garden in soil that's been poisoned. You can plant the best seeds, water them religiously, give them sunlight, do everything right on the surface. But if the soil itself is toxic, nothing will take root. And most people are operating from toxic soil without even knowing it. They learned it from their parents, who learned it from their parents. They absorbed it from a culture that teaches you to fear scarcity more than it teaches you to expect abundance. They internalized it during moments of rejection or failure or disappointment, and those experiences became the lens through which they see every new opportunity. So they're out there hustling, grinding, pushing, but they're doing it all from this contracted state where they feel small, where they feel like they have to prove themselves, where they're constantly looking over their shoulder, comparing themselves to others, wondering if they're enough. And you know what the universe reflects back to them? Exactly that. More situations that make them feel small, more experiences that require proof, more reasons to doubt themselves. Because here's the law that nobody wants to hear, but everybody needs to understand. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. This is perhaps the most powerful and most uncomfortable truth in all of personal development. Your desires, your wishes, your goals, those don't determine what shows up in your life. Your internal state does. Your vibrational frequency does. The person you're being, not the person you're trying to become, creates your reality. And right now, at this exact moment as you're hearing these words, something inside you is registering this truth. Maybe it's uncomfortable, maybe it's challenging everything you thought you knew about how success works. But there's also something else happening. There's an ember starting to glow. You've felt it. Before, probably many times, those moments when you felt unstoppable, when you knew you could do anything, when opportunities seemed to appear out of nowhere, that wasn't luck. That was you, briefly, touching that place of alignment where your internal state matched your desires. But then what happened? Life threw you a curveball, or someone criticized you, or you had a setback and that ember got covered over with ashes. The fire that was starting to build got dampened down, and you went back to operating from that place of lack, of fear, of trying to prove yourself worthy of what you want. If this shifted something in you, hit that like button. It helps this message reach others who need to hear it. But here's what most people don't realize. That fire never actually goes out. It can't. It's the essence of who you really are underneath all the conditioning and the fear and the limiting beliefs. It's been there since you were born, and it's been waiting for you to stop trying so hard to be something you're not, and instead remember what you actually are. That ember is your true nature, your authentic power, your natural state of abundance. And the reason you're here right now, the reason something drew you to this message, is because that ember is ready to become a flame again. The transformation that's available to you isn't about adding more techniques or strategies or information. It's about removing the layers that have been smothering your natural fire. It's about peeling back the false beliefs that convinced you that you're small or unworthy or incapable or unlucky. Because underneath all of that is a version of you that doesn't question whether abundance is possible. It simply knows it is. Leave a comment saying, "My fire is igniting," if you can feel that ember starting to glow brighter as you listen to this. There's a feeling you've probably experienced more times than you'd like to admit. It's that sensation of pushing forward with everything you have, doing all the right things, following all the right advice, and yet something feels off. It's not that you're not making progress. You might even be checking boxes, hitting milestones, moving in what looks like the right direction. But internally, there's this friction, this resistance. It's like walking into a strong wind where every step requires twice the effort it should. You look around and see other people who seem to glide through life effortlessly, and you wonder what's wrong with you. Why does everything feel so hard? What you're experiencing is misalignment. It's the gap between who you're trying to be and who you actually believe yourself to be at the deepest level. It's the disconnect between the goals you've set and the identity you're carrying. And this misalignment creates an internal drag that slows down or completely blocks the flow of abundance into your life. Think of it like trying to stream a video with a terrible internet connection. The video is there, the content exists, but the signal can't get through clearly because something in the transmission is interfering with the flow. This interference isn't your fault. You didn't consciously create it. It got installed in you through years of experiences, messages, and conditioning. Every time someone told you to be realistic, that's a piece of interference. Every time you tried something and it didn't work out, and you internalized that as evidence of your inadequacy, that's interference. Every time you looked at someone else's success and felt that pang of, "That's not for people like me," more interference got added to your signal. Layer by layer, experience by experience, you built up this internal static that now sits between you and the life you're trying to create. But here's what you need to understand about true transformation, because this is where most self-help and personal development gets it completely wrong. Real change doesn't happen through force. It doesn't happen through shouting affirmations at yourself in the mirror or white-knuckling your way through new habits. Those approaches might create temporary results, but they don't touch the deep programming. They don't reach the current beneath the surface. Real transformation happens quietly. It happens through subtle shifts in your internal universe that ripple outward until suddenly everything in your external world has rearranged itself. Think about how a river changes course. It doesn't happen dramatically in one moment with a loud crash. Water finds a weak spot in the bank, starts flowing through it, and over time, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly, the entire river redirects. That's how your mind works. You don't need to force a complete overhaul of your entire belief system overnight. You just need to find the right weak spot in your old programming, the place where new awareness can start flowing through, and let it gradually but inevitably reshape everything. What we're doing right now in this conversation is creating that opening. You're not being asked to believe something you don't believe or pretend to be someone you're not. You're simply being invited to look at what's really happening beneath your conscious awareness, to feel into that deep current we talked about and notice where it's actually flowing. Because once you can see it, once you can feel it, it loses its invisible power over you. You stop being the person that things happen to and become the person who directs the flow. This is the beginning of a reordering, not a violent revolution in your psyche, but a gentle, powerful reorganization of how you see yourself and what you believe is possible for you. The stories you've been telling yourself about who you are and what you deserve, those stories are just software running in the background, and software can be updated. The beliefs that have kept you stuck in patterns of limitation, those beliefs were learned, which means they can be unlearned. The identity that vibrates lack instead of abundance, that identity was constructed, which means a new one can be built. You're standing at the threshold of something significant, not because I'm telling you something magical, but because you're finally looking at the mechanics of how your internal world actually creates your external reality. You're seeing behind the curtain. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you understand that your current experience is being generated from within, the power shifts. You're no longer hoping the world will change for you. You're recognizing that when you change, the world must reflect that change back to you. Write, "I see the pattern now," in the comments if you're starting to recognize where your internal friction has been coming from. I want you to imagine something with me for a moment, and I mean really visualize this. Picture yourself standing in front of a mirror, but this isn't an ordinary mirror. This mirror is impossibly large, stretching beyond what you can see. And it doesn't just show your physical appearance. If you could look into it deeply enough, you'd see layers upon layers of yourself that you rarely acknowledge. You'd see your energy, the stories you carry, the beliefs that run automatically in the background of your mind, the desires you've buried, the wounds you've never fully healed. This mirror shows not the person you pretend to be or the person you wish you were, but the person you've actually been presenting to the universe every single day. This is the mirror that matters, not the one hanging in your bathroom, but this invisible, energetic mirror that reflects your true internal state out into the world. And here's what most people never realize. This is the mirror the universe is reading. Not your words, not your intentions, not your vision boards or your carefully crafted goals. The universe is looking at this deeper reflection and saying, okay, this is who you really are. This is what you really believe about yourself. So this is what I'm going to send back to you. The problem is that most of us have never actually looked at what's showing up in that mirror. We're so busy trying to change our external circumstances, so focused on fixing what's happening out there, that we never stop to examine what we're projecting from in here. We're trying to change the reflection instead of changing what's creating the reflection. It's like standing in front of a regular mirror, not liking what you see, and trying to rearrange your reflection by touching the glass. You can smudge the mirror all you want, but until you change your actual position, expression, or appearance, the reflection stays the same. Now here's where this gets really profound, and I need you to sit with this because it might be uncomfortable. That internal mirror doesn't reflect objective reality. It reflects your programming. Whatever has been coded into your subconscious mind, whether it's scarcity or abundance, fear, or confidence, doubt, or certainty, that's what gets reflected back to you in the form of your lived experience. If your programming has been shaped by messages of not enough, of having to struggle, of life being hard, of money being difficult, of success being for other people but not you, then that's exactly what your mirror shows, and that's exactly what the universe delivers. Think about how a computer works. It doesn't care what you want it to do. It only does what it's programmed to do. You can sit in front of a computer all day, wishing it would perform differently, but unless you change the actual code, it's going to keep running the same programs and producing the same results. Your subconscious mind works the same way. It's running programs that were installed years ago, maybe decades ago, and those programs are generating your current reality whether you're aware of them or not. The universe isn't withholding anything from you. It's not playing favorites. It's not being cruel or unfair. It's simply responding to the signal you're broadcasting. And if that signal is tuned to the frequency of lack, of fear, of unworthiness, of comparison, of shame, of guilt, all those heavy, dense emotions that most of us carry around without even noticing, then the universe has no choice but to send back experiences that match that frequency. It's not punishment. It's just how the system works. This is why affirmations alone don't work for most people. They're standing in front of that internal mirror saying, I'm abundant, I'm wealthy, I'm successful, but the reflection staring back at them is still showing all the old programming. The deeper part of their mind, the part that actually creates their reality, doesn't believe a word of it. So the universe looks at the deeper reflection, not the surface words, and keeps delivering the same patterns. But when you understand this, when you really get that your external world is nothing more than a printout of your internal programming, everything shifts. Because suddenly you realize you've been trying to change the printout instead of changing what you're printing from. You've been editing the document after it comes out of the printer instead of editing the file on your computer. And no matter how many times you mark up that printed page, the next one that comes out will be identical until you go back to the source and change the original file. The revelation isn't that you need to work harder or try more strategies or push through more obstacles. The revelation is that you need to look at what's actually in that internal mirror and begin the process of updating the reflection. Comment, I'm ready to update my programming. if you're seeing how your internal state has been creating your external reality. So let's address the elephant in the room, the thing that's probably making you a little uncomfortable right now. If what I'm saying is true, if your external reality really is a reflection of your internal programming, then that means the life you're living right now, the bank account, the relationships, the opportunities or lack thereof, the whole situation is a mirror of who you've been on the inside. And I know that can sting a bit. It can feel like blame or judgment, like I'm saying it's your fault that things haven't worked out the way you wanted. But that's not what this is about at all. Yes, it's uncomfortable to recognize that you've been participating in the creation of circumstances you don't like. But here's the flip side that makes this revelation so incredibly powerful. If you created this, even unconsciously, then you have the power to create something different. Think about that for a second. If your current reality was something that just happened to you randomly, if it was purely the result of external forces beyond your control, you'd be stuck. You'd be a victim with no agency, just hoping things somehow get better. But if you understand that your internal state has been generating your external experience, then suddenly you have leverage. You have a point of intervention. You can change the source code. This is liberation disguised as responsibility. Yes, you have to own the fact that your programming has been creating your results, but in that ownership lies your power to reprogram everything from the ground up. We're not talking about surface-level changes here. We're not talking about positive thinking or pretending everything is fine when it's not. We're talking about going to the root level of your identity and updating the fundamental operating system that's been running your life. Let me give you another way to understand this. Imagine your mind has an internal compass, just like a physical compass that always points north. No matter how you turn it, no matter how you shake it, that needle finds north, because that's what it's designed to do. Your mind has a compass too, and it's always pointing towards something. For most people, that compass is pointing towards scarcity, not because they're bad people or because they're doing something wrong, but because that's the direction they were taught. They grew up in households where scarcity was the dominant conversation. Maybe their parents stressed about money, argued about bills, said things like, "Money doesn't grow on trees," or "We can't afford that," or "Rich people are greedy." Those weren't just throwaway comments. Those were programming instructions being downloaded into a young, impressionable mind. Or maybe scarcity showed up in more subtle ways. Maybe it was in the unspoken tension when unexpected expenses came up, or the way success was talked about as something rare and difficult, something that required sacrifice and struggle. Maybe it was watching people work themselves to exhaustion and still barely get by, teaching you that effort doesn't necessarily equal reward. Whatever the specific messages were, they calibrated your internal compass to point in a certain direction. And if that direction is scarcity, then no matter what you consciously want or try to create, you keep drifting back toward that magnetic north. Here's what makes this so insidious. Once your compass is calibrated, it feels like truth. It feels like reality. You don't walk around thinking, "I have a scarcity mindset." You just think, "This is how life is." You look at your circumstances and you see confirmation everywhere that money is hard, that you have to struggle, that abundance is for other people. Your compass keeps pointing you towards scarcity, and you keep following it, not realizing that the direction you're moving in was set by programming you didn't choose and probably don't even remember receiving. But compasses can be recalibrated. That's the whole point of what we're doing here. You're not stuck with the direction that was set for you in childhood. You're not doomed to keep following a path that leads to the same limitations over and over. Once you become aware that your internal compass exists and understand what direction it's currently pointing, you can begin the process of adjusting it. You can reset your magnetic north from scarcity to abundance, from limitation to possibility, from fear to faith. This recalibration doesn't happen by simply deciding you want it to be different. It happens through a deeper process of examining the beliefs that set your compass in the first place, questioning whether they're actually true, and gradually installing new programming that points you in a different direction. Type "recalibrating my compass" in the comments if you're recognizing that your internal north has been pointing towards scarcity and you're ready to change that direction. The recalibration process starts with something most people never do. They never question the stories they inherited. Think about it. How many beliefs do you carry about money, success, and your own capabilities that you never actually examined? You just absorbed them like a sponge absorbs water. Someone told you something when you were 7 years old, or you watched how adults around you behaved, and your young mind said, "Okay, this must be how the world works," and filed it away as fact. But it was never fact. It was just someone else's experience, someone else's limitation, someone else's fear being passed down to you like an heirloom you never asked for. I've watched this pattern play out thousands of times. Someone will be stuck financially, and when we dig into their beliefs, we find these inherited stories running in the background, like apps you forgot you had open on your phone, draining your battery without you noticing. Stories like "money is the root of all evil," or "you have to work hard for every penny," or "successful people are lucky," or "I'm just not good with money." And when I ask where these beliefs came from, they can usually trace them back to specific moments, specific people, specific experiences that installed this programming decades ago. But here's what's fascinating. Once you see that these are just stories, not truths, they start to lose their grip on you. It's like watching a magic trick and then learning how it's done. The illusion only works when you don't know the mechanism behind it. The moment you see the wires, the mirrors, the misdirection, the magic disappears. Your limiting beliefs about money and success are exactly the same. They seem so real, so solid, so true until you examine them closely and realize they're just constructs. They're just software that was installed, and software can be uninstalled. This is where the real work begins. And I want to be honest with you about what this work actually looks like, because it's different than what most people expect. You're not going to recalibrate your internal compass by repeating affirmations you don't believe or visualizing outcomes that feel impossible. That approach is like trying to paint over rust. It might look better for a minute, but the corrosion is still there underneath, and it's going to keep spreading. Real recalibration happens when you start making different decisions from a different internal state. Let me explain what I mean by that. Every single day, you're faced with hundreds of small decisions. Most of them seem inconsequential, but each one is either reinforcing your old programming or building new programming. When an opportunity comes up and you immediately think, "That's not for me," or "I can't afford that," or "I'm not ready yet," you're following your old compass. You're letting that scarcity calibration make your decisions for you. But when you pause, recognize that automatic thought, and then consciously choose a different response, even just one that's slightly more abundant, slightly more expansive, you're beginning to shift the compass. It's not about massive overnight transformation, it's about accumulation. Every time you question a limiting belief, instead of accepting it as truth, you're loosening its hold. Every time you act from possibility instead of fear, you're strengthening a new neural pathway. Every time you choose to see yourself as capable instead of limited, you're updating your internal programming one line of code at a time. And here's what happens when you commit to this process. Slowly at first, then suddenly, your external reality starts to shift. Opportunities appear that weren't there before, or maybe they were there, but you couldn't see them because your compass was pointing the wrong direction. The people who experience breakthrough transformations in their financial lives aren't the ones who found some secret technique or stumbled onto a lucky break. They're the ones who recognize that their internal compass was miscalibrated and did the patient, consistent work of adjusting it. They stopped accepting their inherited programming as destiny and started consciously creating new programming aligned with where they actually want to go. Write, "I choose new programming" in the comments if you're ready to stop following the compass you inherited and start setting your own direction toward abundance. There's a question I know is forming in your mind right now, and it's the right question to be asking. How do you actually do this? How do you take a compass that's been pointing toward scarcity for your entire life and recalibrate it toward abundance? Because understanding the concept is one thing, but implementation is where most people get stuck. They see the truth of what I'm saying, they recognize their patterns, they even feel motivated to change, but then they don't know what to actually do differently when they wake up tomorrow morning. Here's where we get into something that sounds almost too simple to be powerful, but I promise you, it's the foundation of everything. The way you reprogram your internal compass is by changing the story you tell yourself about yourself. Not the story you tell other people. Not the narrative you post on social media or share at networking events. The private, internal story that runs on repeat in your mind when no one else is listening. That story, the one you might not even realize you're telling, is creating everything in your life right now. Let me break down how this works, because it's a chain reaction that most people never see. The story you repeat in your mind shapes your perception. Your perception determines what you notice and what you ignore. What you notice influences your decisions. Your decisions, repeated over time, become your habits. Your habits solidify into your identity, and your identity creates your destiny. It's not mystical or abstract. It's mechanical. Change the story at the beginning of that chain, and everything downstream changes with it. But here's where people go wrong. They try to change the story by lying to themselves. They stand in front of the mirror and say, "I am a millionaire," when their bank account is overdrawn, and every cell in their body knows it's not true. The subconscious mind isn't stupid. It rejects obvious falsehoods. So affirmations that contradict your current reality don't reprogram anything. They just create internal conflict and more evidence that this stuff doesn't work. The real shift happens when you change the story in a way that your subconscious can actually accept. Instead of "I am wealthy" when you're broke, you start with "I am learning to build wealth," or "I am becoming someone who attracts financial abundance," or "I'm developing the mindset of prosperity." These are bridges. They acknowledge where you are while pointing toward where you're going. They're true enough that your mind doesn't reject them, and directional enough that they start pulling you forward. Think about the story you've been telling yourself up until now. Maybe it sounds like, "I'm not good with money," or "I always struggle financially," or "things never work out for me," or "I'm just unlucky." Every time you repeat that story, even silently in your own thoughts, you're reinforcing it. You're telling your subconscious, "This is who I am. This is what's true about me." So keep creating circumstances that match this identity. And your subconscious, being the faithful servant it is, says "understood," and goes about making sure your external reality reflects that internal narrative. But what if you started telling a different story? What if instead of "I'm not good with money," you said "I'm developing financial intelligence"? What if instead of "things never work out," you said "I'm learning to recognize and seize opportunities"? What if instead of "I'm unlucky," you said "I'm becoming a magnet for positive synchronicities"? These aren't lies, they're redirections. They're new stories that have just as much validity as the old ones. Maybe more, and they point your compass in a completely different direction. The transformation isn't instant, and anyone who tells you it is selling you something. But it is inevitable if you stay consistent, because every time you choose the new story over the old one, you're casting a vote for a different identity. You're building neural pathways that support abundance instead of scarcity. You're training your reticular activating system, the part of your brain that filters what information to pay attention to look for evidence of your new story instead of your old one. And as you accumulate evidence of this new identity, it becomes easier to believe, which makes it easier to embody, which creates more evidence in a beautiful upward spiral. The people who completely transform their financial reality don't do it by learning some secret investing strategy or stumbling into a lucky opportunity. They do it by becoming a different person first. They change the story, which changes their decisions, which changes their habits, which changes their identity, which changes their destiny. Comment, I'm rewriting my story. If you're ready to consciously choose a new narrative about who you are and what's possible for you, I want you to pause for just a moment and ask yourself a question. Not the kind of question you answer quickly and move on from, but the kind that requires you to sit with it and listen for what comes up from somewhere deeper than your conscious thoughts. What story have you been carrying around that no longer serves you? What belief about yourself, about money, about success, about what's possible for you has become so familiar that it feels like truth? But if you really examine it, you'll see it's just something you inherited. Maybe it's surfacing right now as you listen to these words. Maybe there's a phrase echoing in your mind, something you've said to yourself so many times that it's become part of your identity. I'm not the type of person who, or in my family we've never, or people like me don't. These phrases feel solid and real because you've reinforced them thousands of times, but they're not facts about the universe. They're just stories. Stories that were handed to you by people who had their own limitations, their own fears, their own unexamined beliefs. And you took those stories and made them your own without ever questioning whether they were true. Here's what I've discovered working with people who've made massive transformations. The beliefs that limit us the most are the ones we don't even recognize as beliefs. They've become so integrated into how we see the world that we think they're just reality. It's like growing up in a house painted entirely blue and assuming the whole world is blue because you've never known anything different. The moment you step outside and see other colors, the illusion shatters. But until that moment, you genuinely believe blue is all there is. The same thing happens with your beliefs about abundance. If you grew up hearing that money is scarce, that you have to fight for every opportunity, that success requires sacrifice and struggle, those messages didn't just pass through your mind like water through a sieve. They settled in. They became the foundation of how you interpret every financial situation you encounter. And now, years or even decades later, you're still operating from those assumptions without realizing they're optional. They're not the truth about how the world works. They're just the particular shade of blue your house happened to be painted. But here's where this gets really interesting, and it's something that changes everything once you truly understand it. You're not trying to become something you've never been. You're not trying to learn some foreign skill or adopt some alien mindset. What we're really doing here is remembering. Before all that programming got installed, before all those limiting stories got layered on top of your natural state, you were already abundant. Not in the sense of having money, you were a child, but in the sense of believing anything was possible, of feeling worthy of good things, of expecting the world to be friendly and opportunities to appear. Watch a 4-year-old for an afternoon, if you want to see what I'm talking about. They don't question whether they deserve things. They don't worry about scarcity. They don't compare themselves to others and feel less than. They're just fully present, fully alive, fully expecting life to deliver wonder and possibility. That state, that natural abundance consciousness, is still inside you. It's just been buried under years of conditioning, covered over by experiences that taught you to contract instead of expand, to fear instead of trust, to doubt instead of believe. Deep within your mind, in that river we talked about at the beginning, that current of power is still flowing. It never stopped. It just got blocked, diverted, channeled in directions that don't serve you. But it's there, dormant like an ember under ashes, waiting for you to blow on it gently and bring it back to life. This isn't about becoming someone new. This is about removing the layers that have been covering up who you actually are underneath all the programming. Think of it like an ancient flame that's been barely flickering in a dark room. You don't need to create fire from nothing. You just need to add fuel, oxygen, attention. You need to remove whatever's been smothering it and give it space to grow. That's what we're doing with your abundance consciousness. We're not installing something foreign. We're awakening something that's been there all along, waiting patiently for you to remember it exists. Type, "I remember now," in the comments if you're starting to feel that dormant power stirring inside you. That sense that maybe you've always had access to this, but just forgot how to tap into it. There's something most people do every single day without even noticing, and it's quietly sabotaging everything they're trying to build. They send commands to the universe through their internal dialogue, but these aren't the conscious, intentional affirmations everyone talks about. These are the throwaway phrases, the casual thoughts, the automatic responses that slip through their mind dozens of times a day. And each one of these phrases is like placing an order with reality, saying, "Yes, send me more of this, please." Think about the things you say to yourself when something doesn't go your way, when an opportunity falls through, when money gets tight. Do you hear yourself thinking, "Of course this happened," or "Nothing ever works out for me," or "I knew it was too good to be true"? These aren't just neutral observations. They're commands. They're instructions to your subconscious about what to expect, what to look for, what to create more of. And your subconscious, being the incredibly powerful but non-judgmental servant it is, says, "Understood," and goes about making sure your external reality matches what you keep telling it is true. Maybe your phrase is, "It's not that easy," whenever you hear about someone else's success, or "I'm not that good," when you compare yourself to others. Or maybe "It's not for me," when you see an opportunity that scares you, or "Something always happens," when things start going well, like you're already bracing for the inevitable disaster, or "I just don't have luck," as a blanket explanation for why life seems harder for you than for other people. Each one of these phrases feels harmless in the moment. It's just a thought, just a passing comment to yourself. But repeated over weeks, months, years, these phrases accumulate like small stones tied to your ankles. One stone doesn't slow you down much, but 100 stones, 1,000 stones. Pretty soon you're not moving at all, and you can't figure out why everything feels so heavy. The truth that's both unsettling and liberating is this: the story that's been running your life, the narrative that's been keeping you limited, isn't even yours. You didn't choose it. You didn't sit down one day and decide, "I'm going to believe that abundance is difficult and success is for other people." You absorbed it when you were too young to have any filters, too young to question what you were being taught, too young to realize that the adults around you were just passing along their own unexamined beliefs. Your parents' financial stress became your belief about money. Your teacher's comment in 3rd grade became your belief about your intelligence. Your first business failure became your belief about your capabilities. Someone else's fear became your limitation. And you've been carrying it around ever since, treating it like it's some fundamental truth about who you are, when really it's just borrowed programming that was never meant to define your whole life. But here's the shift, and I want you to really feel the weight lifting as you hear this. If those stories aren't truly yours, if they were just inherited, absorbed, learned from, people who had their own limitations and fears, then you have every right to release them. You don't owe loyalty to beliefs that don't serve you. You don't have to keep honoring limitations that someone else experienced just because they passed them down to you. You're not betraying your family or your history by choosing to believe something different. You're finally stepping into your own power. When you let go of an inherited story, something remarkable happens. It's like you've been carrying a heavy backpack full of rocks your whole life, and someone finally tells you that you're allowed to set it down. The moment you do, you realize how much energy you've been spending just to maintain your current position. And suddenly, that energy is available for movement, for growth, for actually building the life you want instead of just surviving the one you have. The new narrative you write doesn't have to be dramatic or grandiose. It just has to be more true to who you're becoming than who you've been. It has to point your compass in the direction you actually want to go instead of the direction you were told to go. And every time you choose that new story over the old one, every time you catch yourself about to repeat one of those limiting phrases and consciously choose different words, instead you're rewriting your programming in real time. Leave a comment saying, "I release what isn't mine," if you're ready to let go of the inherited stories and silent commands that have been weighing you down. Come back with me to that river we talked about earlier, the one that represents the deepest part of your mind where everything originates. Your decisions, your impulses, your fears, your ambitions, all of it flows from this source. And for most of your life, maybe even your entire life up until this moment, that river has been flowing in a direction you never consciously chose. Someone diverted it when you were young, when you didn't have the awareness to notice what was happening, and it's been flowing towards scarcity, toward limitation, towards struggle ever since. But here's what makes this moment so powerful. You're standing at the riverbank now, maybe for the first time, actually seeing the current instead of just being swept along by it. And this might sound too simple to be meaningful, but stay with me because it's absolutely crucial. The very act of observing changes what you're observing. This isn't just philosophy or spiritual talk. It's quantum physics, it's neuroscience. It's the most fundamental principle of transformation. The moment you become aware of a pattern, that pattern begins to lose its automatic hold over you. Think about how this works in everyday life. When you're driving a car and you're on autopilot, you can drive for miles without really noticing the journey. You arrive at your destination and barely remember how you got there. But the instant you become conscious of your driving, maybe because you hear a strange sound or notice something unusual on the road, suddenly you're present. You're aware of every decision, every turn, every adjustment. The same mechanical process of driving is happening, but your relationship to it has completely changed because consciousness entered the picture. Your internal river works the same way. For years, it's been flowing on autopilot, running the same programs, following the same patterns, creating the same results. And you've been swept along by it, vaguely aware that something feels off, but not quite able to pinpoint what or why. But now, right now, you're becoming conscious of the current. You're seeing that it's there, understanding where it's been flowing, recognizing that it was diverted by forces outside of you. And in that recognition, in that awareness, power returns to you. This is something most people never grasp. They think power comes from taking action, from working harder, from forcing things to happen. And action matters, absolutely. But the foundation of all real power is consciousness. Because when you're unconscious, when you're operating on autopilot, you're at the mercy of your programming. You're being run by patterns you didn't choose and don't even see. But the moment you become aware, you step into a different role. You're no longer the leaf floating on the river. You're the one who can observe the river, understand its direction, and begin to redirect its flow. There's a reason why every genuine spiritual tradition, every depth psychology approach, every real transformational methodology starts with awareness, not positive thinking, not goal setting, not strategy or technique. Awareness. Because everything else is just rearranging furniture on the surface while the foundation remains unchanged. But when you bring consciousness to your internal patterns, to the stories you're telling yourself, to the beliefs running your decisions, to the vibration you're emitting, you access the place where real change originates. And here's what happens as you practice this. At first, you might only catch your patterns after the fact. You react in the old way, then hours later realize, oh, I did it again. That's awareness growing. Then you start catching yourself during the pattern. You're in the middle of the old story, and suddenly you notice, wait, I'm doing that thing again. That's awareness deepening. Eventually, you catch the pattern before it even fully engages. You feel the old impulse arising, but because you're conscious of it, you're able to pause and choose differently. That's awareness becoming power. This is what transforms the river's direction. Not through force or willpower or trying to dam up the current, but through gentle, persistent awareness that gradually shifts the flow. Each time you observe without judgment, each time you notice a pattern without beating yourself up about it, each time you see the old programming trying to run and you simply acknowledge, oh, there it is. Again, you're loosening its grip. You're creating space between stimulus and response. You're recovering the power to choose. Write, awareness is my power, in the comments. If you're feeling that shift happening right now, that sense of stepping back and seeing your patterns instead of being unconsciously controlled by them. Now I want you to imagine something else, something that might feel uncomfortable at first, but is absolutely essential to understand. Visualize a fire, but not just any fire. This is an ancient fire, the kind that's been burning since before you learned to doubt yourself. It illuminates not just the physical space around it, but something deeper. It lights up the soul. This fire represents your authentic desire, the thing you want so badly that it almost frightens you to admit it, even to yourself. The dream you've pushed down, the ambition you've minimized, the life you truly want, but have convinced yourself is unrealistic or impossible or not meant for people like you. That fire, that desire is your real compass, not the safe goals you've written down because they seem achievable, not the modest dreams you've allowed yourself because they won't invite criticism or judgment, not the watered-down version of what you want that you've presented to the world so you won't look foolish if you fail. I'm talking about the deep, burning, authentic desire that sits at your core, the one that whispers to you in quiet moments when you let your guard down. The universe doesn't respond to your fears, even though you've been feeding them so much energy. The universe doesn't respond to your doubts, even though they've been running the show for so long. The universe responds to your authentic desire, to that fire at your core that knows what it wants before your logical mind steps in to explain all the reasons why it's not possible. That desire is a signal, a transmission, a magnetic force. But most people have spent so much time and energy suppressing it that they've forgotten it's even there. Here's why this matters so much and why the vast majority of people never tap into real abundance. They've learned to distrust their own desires. Think about your childhood for a second. When you wanted something big, something that excited you, what happened? Maybe an adult told you to be more realistic. Maybe they said, "That's nice, honey, but you need to think about getting a real job." Maybe they warned you that wanting too much would only lead to disappointment. Maybe they said success like that is for other people, not for us. Or maybe they didn't say anything at all, but you watched them suppress their own dreams and learned through observation that desire is dangerous, that wanting more is greedy or selfish or naive. So you did what any smart kid would do. You learned to extinguish your fire before someone else could blow it out for you. You learned to want smaller things, safer things, things that wouldn't expose you to ridicule or failure. You learn to translate what do I really want into what's the most I can reasonably expect given my circumstances. You traded your authentic desire for acceptable expectations. And in doing so, you cut yourself off from the very thing that could have guided you toward genuine abundance. This is the tragedy that plays out in millions of lives. People walking around with their inner fire reduced to barely glowing embers, wondering why they feel so numb, so unmotivated, so stuck. They've got goals, sure. They've got plans. They're doing what they're supposed to do, but there's no juice in it, no real energy, because they're not connected to authentic desire anymore. They're operating from should instead of want, from obligation instead of inspiration, from fear instead of longing. The most successful people, the ones who build real wealth and genuine fulfillment, haven't figured out some secret technique for suppressing desire. They've done the opposite. They've given themselves permission to want what they actually want, without apology, without shrinking it down, without qualifying it with all the reasons it might not work out. They've reconnected with that ancient fire and let it guide their decisions, their focus, their energy. And that fire, that authentic desire, acts like a beacon. It draws resources, opportunities, people, ideas toward it in ways that trying and forcing and efforting never could. Type, "I trust my desire" in the comments if you're ready to stop playing small and reconnect with what you authentically want, not what you think you should want or what seems safe to want. That fire inside you, that authentic desire you've been trying to ignore or minimize or rationalize away, it's not random. It's not a fantasy your mind cooked up to torture you with impossible dreams. It's not an emotional whim that you need to grow out of or get over. That fire is information. It's a signal coming from the deepest, most intelligent part of you, trying to show you the path toward the life that actually corresponds to who you are at your core. Think about how nature works for a second. A seed doesn't question what it's supposed to become. An acorn doesn't look at an oak tree and think, "That's unrealistic for someone like me." The desire to become an oak tree is encoded in the acorn's very structure. It's not wishful thinking. It's recognition of what it's designed to express. Your authentic desires work the same way. They're not arbitrary once you made up. They're expressions of your unique design, your specific purpose, the life you're meant to grow into if you give yourself permission. But somewhere along the way, you learn to override that internal GPS. You learn to ignore the signal in favor of what seemed more practical, more acceptable, more achievable, given your circumstances. And so you've been building a life through blind effort, through grinding and pushing and trying to force outcomes, instead of building it through aligned desire, through following that internal signal toward what actually wants to emerge through you. One approach exhausts you and produces mediocre results. The other energizes you and opens pathways you couldn't have planned or predicted. This is where most people get lost in the pursuit of wealth. They're chasing someone else's definition of success, following someone else's blueprint, trying to want what they think they should want. And then they wonder why it all feels so hard, why the motivation keeps fading, why even when they achieve their goals, it doesn't feel like they thought it would. It's because they're out of alignment. They're not building toward their authentic desire. They're building toward a concept, an image, a borrowed dream that never truly belonged to them. So I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, not for me, but for yourself. What does your soul actually yearn for? And I'm not talking about what your parents wanted for you, or what your culture says success looks like, or what your logical mind has decided is the smart, safe choice. I'm talking about that thing that comes up when you let your guard down, when you're lying in bed at night or taking a long walk or sitting in traffic, and your mind drifts to that version of your life that makes your heart beat a little faster. Maybe it's a level of financial freedom that seems ridiculous given where you are now. Maybe it's a creative expression that feels too vulnerable to pursue. Maybe it's a lifestyle that everyone around you would judge or question. Maybe it's an impact you want to make that feels too grand, too ambitious, too much for someone with your background or credentials. Whatever it is, that's not random. That's your soul communicating, trying to get your attention, trying to show you where your real power lies. The secret that the 99% miss is this: abundance doesn't flow to people who have the best strategies or work the hardest or sacrifice the most. Abundance flows to people who dare to recognize themselves in their desires, who look at that seemingly impossible dream and say, yes, that's mine, that belongs to me, that's what I'm here to create, without needing anyone's permission or validation. Because when you claim your authentic desire, when you stop apologizing for wanting what you want and start orienting your entire being toward it, something shifts in the field around you. Opportunities that were always there but invisible suddenly become obvious. Resources you need start appearing. People who can help you show up. Ideas flow. Synchronicities multiply. Not because the universe suddenly decided to favor you, but because you aligned with your natural current. You stopped swimming against your own design and started flowing with it. You became magnetic in a way you never could when you were chasing borrowed dreams or trying to want what you thought you should want. Comment, this is what I truly want, if you're ready to stop hiding from your authentic desire and start building toward what your soul actually yearns for. Here's something that will either sound crazy or will click into place with such force that it changes how you see everything. That authentic desire you're feeling, the one that won't go away no matter how many times you've tried to talk yourself out of it, isn't pulling you toward something that doesn't exist. It's pulling you toward something that already exists. For you, on a different frequency, in a different dimension of possibility. Your desire isn't wishful thinking. It's recognition. It's your soul saying, I remember that place. I know that version of reality. That's where I belong. Think about radio waves for a moment. Right now, there are hundreds of radio signals passing through the space around you. Music, news, conversations, all of it flowing through the air simultaneously. But you can't hear any of it until you tune your radio to the right frequency. The signal was always there. The music was always playing. You just weren't calibrated to receive it. Your desires work the same way. When you feel a deep, persistent longing for a certain kind of life, a certain level of abundance, a certain expression of your gifts, that's not your imagination creating something out of nothing. That's your internal receiver picking up a signal from a version of reality that exists and is trying to pull you toward it. The desire itself is evidence. It's proof that somewhere in the field of infinite possibility, that life you're yearning for is real and available to you. Your soul wouldn't torture you with visions of something impossible. It's showing you a memory of your potential, a preview of what you're capable of becoming, a map to where you actually belong. But here's where most people get stuck, and I want to address this head on because it might be exactly what's blocking you right now. You feel the desire, you recognize it. Maybe, for a moment, you even let yourself believe it's possible. But then something else creeps in, something that's been so familiar for so long that you barely notice it anymore. It's the fear of judgment. Not dramatic, obvious fear like standing on the edge of a cliff. This is quieter, more insidious. It hides behind reasonable-sounding questions. What if I try and fail? What if people think I'm delusional? What if I announce this dream and then can't make it happen? What if I look foolish? What if I'm not as capable as I think I am? These questions feel like caution, like wisdom, like being realistic. But they're actually fear dressed up in logical clothing. And that fear is acting like an inverted magnet in your life. A regular magnet attracts. This fear repels. Every time you feel that pull toward your authentic desire and then immediately follow it with, but what if? You're creating a repelling force that pushes away the very opportunities, resources, and people that could help you move toward what you want. The universe reads this mixed signal and gets confused. You're saying, I want this with your desire, but I don't deserve this, or this isn't for me, with your fear. And since the universe responds to your dominant vibration, not your conscious wishes, it delivers more situations that match the fear rather than the desire. You end up in this frustrating cycle where you want something, you fear you can't have it, and then reality confirms your fear, which makes you more afraid, which creates more evidence that it's not possible, round and round, until you convince yourself to stop wanting it altogether, just to end the pain of the contradiction. But what if the fear of judgment is actually the final guardian before the breakthrough? What if everyone who's ever built real wealth, created meaningful impact, lived an extraordinary life, had to face this exact same fear, and the only difference is they move forward anyway? Not because they weren't afraid, but because they understood something crucial. The judgment you fear is mostly projection. The people who would criticize your dreams are usually the ones who abandoned their own. The people who would call you unrealistic are typically stuck in their own limitations. The people who would mock your ambition are generally defending their own decision to play small. Leave a comment saying, I move through the fear, if you're choosing to align with your desire, despite the fear of judgment that's been holding you back. Let me tell you something that might shift your entire perspective on that fear you've been carrying. That fear of judgment, that voice telling you to stay small, that anxiety about what people will think if you go after what you really want. None of it is originally yours. You weren't born with it. You didn't emerge into this world thinking, I should be careful about dreaming too big, or I better not try that because people might laugh at me. That fear was implanted. It was learned. It was absorbed during moments when you were too young to have any defenses, too young to question what you were being taught, too young to understand that the adults around you were passing along their own unprocessed fears. Maybe it happened when you excitedly shared a dream and someone responded with skepticism instead of encouragement. Maybe it was watching a parent or teacher get criticized for taking a risk. Maybe it was a single comment from someone you looked up to that landed in your psyche and took root. Whatever the specific moment or moments were, that fear became part of your operating system without your conscious consent. You didn't choose it. You didn't sit down and decide, I'm going to be afraid of judgment for the rest of my life. It just got installed, and you've been running that program ever since. But here's the liberating truth. You're not that helpless child anymore. You're an adult now with consciousness, with awareness, with the ability to examine your beliefs and decide which ones serve you and which ones need to be deactivated. That fear that felt so real and so true for so long is just a mental construction, and mental constructions can be deconstructed. You have the power now to look at that fear, recognize it for what it is, borrowed anxiety that never belonged to you, and consciously choose to release it. And when you really think about who's judging you, or who you're afraid will judge you, something interesting emerges. The people whose opinions you're worried about, the ones you imagine criticizing or mocking or dismissing your dreams, who are they really? When you get specific, when you actually picture the faces and think about their lives, you start to notice a pattern. The people most likely to judge your ambitions are the ones who haven't achieved what you're setting out to achieve. They're not living the life you want. They're not taking the risks you're considering. They're not pushing beyond their comfort zones or challenging their own limitations. Here's a principle that holds true across every domain. Those who accomplish don't waste energy judging others who are trying. Those who are actively advancing don't spend their time criticizing people on the journey. Those who have their own dreams alive and burning don't mock someone else's dreams. Why would they? They know how valuable it is to pursue something meaningful. They understand the courage it takes. They respect the process because they're in it themselves. The judgment you fear is coming from people who've either given up on their own potential or never activated it in the first place. They're not offering wisdom from a place of experience. They're protecting their own decisions to play it safe by trying to convince you to do the same. It's not about you at all. It's about them defending the walls they've built around their own lives. And when you understand this, when you really see that the judgment is just their projection, their fear, their limitation being thrown at you, it loses its power. You're about to walk terrain that most of them will never set foot on. You're about to explore possibilities they've convinced themselves don't exist. You're about to discover what happens when someone stops asking permission and starts claiming what's theirs. Of course, people who've never done that will have opinions. Of course, people who've stayed in the safe zone will question why you're leaving it, but their opinions are formed from a vantage point of inexperience, of unfulfilled potential, of dreams they buried. Why would you let that stop you? The fear of judgment is ultimately fear of an illusion. It's fear of criticism from people whose lives you don't even want. It's fear of disappointing people who haven't taken the risks you're taking. It's fear of being misunderstood by people who are still operating from the programming you're breaking free from. And once you see it clearly, once you understand that the judgment means nothing because it's coming from a place you're no longer willing to stay in, you can finally move forward without that invisible weight slowing you down. Write, "Their judgment isn't my truth," in the comments if you're ready to stop letting imaginary critics dictate what you pursue and what you abandon. There's a metaphor that captures exactly where you are right now, and I want you to feel into it deeply because it explains why change feels so difficult even when you know it's necessary. Imagine your mind as an old house, a place you've been living in for as long as you can remember. You know every room, every corner, every creaky floorboard. You know how the light comes through the windows at different times of day. You know which shadows appear at night and where they fall. Some parts of this house are comfortable, maybe even beautiful, but other parts are cramped, dark, outdated, falling apart. There are rooms you avoid because they make you feel small. There are corners that collect dust and memories you'd rather forget. But here's the thing about an old house. Even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's limiting your life, there's a strange comfort in its familiarity. You've adapted to its quirks. You've learned to navigate around its problems. You've made peace with its limitations. And most people, when they reach this point, they make a quiet decision to just stay. They convince themselves that this is fine, this is realistic, this is all they can expect. They paint the walls a different color, rearrange the furniture, try to make the best of it, but the fundamental structure remains the same, and so does their life. You, though, you're starting to see something different. Maybe it's been there all along and you just never noticed it, or maybe it only becomes visible when you're truly ready. There's a door. A new door that wasn't part of the original house. Or maybe it was always there but covered up, hidden behind years of accumulated stuff and old beliefs. And when you look at this door, when you really let yourself see it, you sense that it leads somewhere completely different. Not just a new room in the same old house, but a doorway to an entirely different version of your life. Through that door is the you that's richer, not just financially, but in every sense of the word. The you that's more secure in yourself, more confident in your worth, more certain of your path. The you that's more luminous, carrying an energy that attracts instead of repels. The you that's naturally abundant, where opportunities flow and resources appear and everything feels lighter, easier, more aligned. That door represents your transformation, the threshold between who you've been and who you're becoming. And standing at that door, looking at it, feeling the pull of it, you know in your bones that your life would be completely different if you just walked through. But here's what happens to almost everyone at this exact moment. And it's crucial that you understand this because you're probably experiencing it right now. Just as you're about to reach for that door handle, just as you're gathering the courage to step through, a voice appears. It's not dramatic or loud. It's quiet, reasonable, almost caring in its tone. And it says, what if something goes wrong? What if you open that door and there's nothing good on the other side? What if you leave this house and end up worse off? What if you can't handle what's through? What if you're not ready? What if this is a mistake? That voice sounds like wisdom. It sounds like it's trying to protect you, but what it's actually doing is protecting the old house, protecting the familiar patterns, protecting the identity you've been carrying, even though it no longer fits who you're becoming. Your mind, just like that house, has gotten comfortable with its current structure. And even though that structure is limiting you, even though it's keeping you smaller than you need to be, change represents uncertainty, the unknown, and your survival-oriented brain would rather keep you in a known limitation than risk an unknown expansion. This is the critical moment. This is where most people turn back. They hear that voice of caution and they decide, you know what? Maybe I should stay in the old house. Maybe I should wait until I'm more prepared. Maybe I should be grateful for what I have instead of wanting more. And they close the door before they ever walk through. Convincing themselves it was the wise choice, when really it was just fear disguised as prudence. Comment, I'm walking through the door. If you recognize this moment in your own life and you're choosing transformation over familiar limitation. The key to understanding why that voice of caution appears is recognizing what your mind is actually designed to do. Your mind isn't here to help you grow. That might sound harsh, but it's true. Your mind's primary function is to keep you alive, to keep you safe, to protect you from threats. And in the ancient environment where our brains evolved, anything unfamiliar was potentially dangerous. The unknown could kill you. So your brain developed this incredible ability to pattern match, to recognize familiar situations and keep you in them because familiar equals survivable. But here's the problem with that design in the modern world. Your mind protects your past, not your future. It protects what it knows, not what you desire. It protects the identity you've been carrying for years, not the potential you're trying to step into. That cautious voice isn't giving you wisdom about what's possible on the other side of that door. It can't. It has no data about your future. It only has data about your past. And it's using that historical information to try to keep you in the patterns you've already established, even when those patterns are suffocating you. So when fear shows up and says, what if something goes wrong? What it's really saying is, I don't have a map for this territory, and without a map I can't guarantee your safety, so please stay where I can predict outcomes. It's not evil. It's not trying to sabotage you. It's just doing its job based on outdated programming. But if you let that fear make your decisions, if you let that protective mechanism dictate your choices, you will spend your entire life repeating ancient versions of yourself. You'll keep living in that old house year after year, decade after decade, knowing there's a door but never walking through it, always wondering what could have been but never finding out. The people who transform their lives, who break through to levels of abundance and fulfillment that seemed impossible from where they started, they all face this exact same moment. They all stand at that door. They all hear that voice of caution. The difference is they recognize it for what it is, an outdated protection mechanism trying to keep them small, and they cross the threshold anyway, not because they're not afraid, but because they understand that the real risk isn't walking through the door. The real risk is staying in the old house and watching their one precious life slip by without ever discovering what they're truly capable of. And here's what happens when you actually cross that threshold, when you dare to step through that door despite the fear. Life doesn't fall apart like your cautious mind predicted. Instead, something remarkable begins to occur. It's subtle at first, so subtle you might almost miss it, but if you pay attention, you'll notice that things start reorganizing themselves around your new direction. People who match your new energy begin appearing in your life, seemingly out of nowhere. Opportunities that weren't visible from inside the old house suddenly become obvious. Ideas flow more freely. Resources show up when you need them. Synchronicities multiply, those meaningful coincidences where you think of someone and they call, or you need information and the perfect book falls off a shelf, or you're wondering about next steps and a conversation provides exactly the clarity you were seeking. This isn't magic or mysticism. It's what happens when you align your actions with your authentic desire instead of your inherited fear. The universe, reality, the field of infinite possibility, whatever you want to call it, responds to coherence. When your internal state matches your intentions, when you're not split between wanting something and fearing it, when you cross that threshold and commit to the new version of yourself, everything in your external world begins to reflect that internal shift. Paths that seemed completely blocked suddenly open. Solutions to problems that stumped you for months appear clearly. People say yes when you expected no. Doors open that you didn't even know existed. But none of this can happen while you're still standing in the old house, looking at the door, listening to the voice of caution and letting it convince you to wait, to prepare more, to be more certain before you make a move. The transformation, the abundance, the life you actually want, it's all on the other side of that threshold. And the only way to access it is to trust your internal fire more than your habitual fear. Type "I choose my potential" in the comments if you're ready to cross that threshold and discover what's been waiting for you on the other side. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question instead of rushing past it to get to the answer. What would actually happen if today, right now in this moment, you decided to cross that internal door? Not tomorrow after you've prepared more, not next month after you've figured everything out, not next year when circumstances are better. Today, what would happen if you gave yourself permission to be the version of yourself you've been repressing, the one you've been keeping locked away because it seemed too much, too ambitious, too different from who everyone expects you to be? What would happen if you stopped negotiating with your desires and just claimed them fully? If you said, "Yes, I want that level of wealth," without immediately following it with, "But I should be realistic." If you pursued that dream without apologizing for it, without shrinking it down to make others comfortable, without qualifying it with disclaimers about how you know it's a long shot, what would happen if you gave yourself permission to desire without the guilt, the shame, the fear that's been wrapped around your ambitions for so long? I'll tell you what would happen. And this is the part that most self-help content gets completely backward. Your identity would shift first, before anything in your external world changes. And that's exactly the opposite of how most people approach transformation. They're trying to change their reality without changing their identity. They want different results while maintaining the same internal state. They want more income while keeping the same relationship with money. They want better opportunities while vibrating the same frequency of doubt and unworthiness. And it doesn't work. It can't work. It's like trying to make a magnet attract gold when it's magnetized toward iron. The magnet isn't broken. It's not failing. It's doing exactly what it's designed to do based on its magnetic properties. If you want it to attract something different, you have to change the magnet itself, not just wish harder or try different techniques or read more books about gold attraction. You have to alter the fundamental nature of what's doing the attracting. Your identity works the same way. If your core identity, the deep programming about who you are and what you're capable of and what you deserve, is still calibrated to struggle and limitation and maybe someday, then that's what you'll keep experiencing no matter how many goals you set or vision boards you create or affirmations you repeat. The external techniques can't override the internal programming. They're operating on different levels. One is surface, the other is foundational. But when you shift your identity first, when you cross that internal door and start operating from the version of yourself who already embodies abundance, who already feels worthy of success, who already vibrates confidence and possibility, your external reality has no choice but to reorganize itself to match. It's not instant. There's a lag time while the old momentum plays out and the new patterns establish themselves, but it's inevitable, because reality is always a reflection of identity, never the other way around. This is why people who win the lottery often end up broke within a few years. Their external reality changed dramatically, but their identity didn't. They got access to wealth without becoming someone who knows how to hold wealth, attract wealth, multiply wealth. So their unchanged identity pulls them back to familiar territory. The money flows out as quickly as it flowed in, because internally they're still the same person with the same beliefs about money and themselves. And this is also why people who build wealth from nothing and then lose it can rebuild it relatively quickly. Their identity changed during the process of building it the first time. They became someone different internally. So even when external circumstances take everything away, the identity remains. And that identity recreates the results, because that's what identity does. It generates reality from the inside out. Understanding this changes everything about how you approach your goals. You stop trying to force external changes and start focusing on internal transformation. You stop asking, how do I make more money? And start asking, who do I need to become to naturally attract abundance? You stop pushing against your current circumstances and start embodying the frequency of where you want to be. And in that shift, in that crossing of the internal threshold, the real transformation begins. Write identity first, results follow in the comments. If you're grasping how backwards most people have been approaching their transformation and you're ready to do it in the correct order, I want you to try something with me right now. Close your eyes for a moment, or if you're driving or can't close them, just shift your attention inward. I want you to visualize a point right in the center of your chest. Not your physical heart, but something deeper, something energetic. Imagine there's a small core there, like a sun burning at the center of your being. This isn't anatomy we're talking about, this is energy. This is the source point from which everything about you radiates outward. From that internal sun comes your vibration, the frequency you're broadcasting into the world every single moment. From that core emanates your deep identity, the truth of who you are beneath all the masks and roles and adaptations. Every thought you've ever had, every emotion you've ever felt, every belief you've ever held, all of it gets stored in that internal sun. And from there, it radiates outward like light, like heat, like a signal that the universe is constantly reading and responding to. Most people have never consciously connected with this part of themselves. They're so busy managing their external presentation, so focused on what's happening outside, that they've completely lost touch with the source of their experience. They don't realize that everything they're seeing in their external world is actually being generated from this internal sun. The quality of their relationships, the opportunities that appear or don't appear, the amount of money flowing through their life, the level of fulfillment they feel, all of it is a direct reflection of what's burning in that core. And here's the thing about wealth that almost nobody understands until they've experienced it directly. Wealth is not a result. It's not something you achieve after you've done enough, worked hard enough, learned enough, or gotten lucky enough. Wealth is a prior identity. It's an internal state that exists first, before the money shows up, before the opportunities manifest, before the external circumstances reflect it. It's an energy, a way of being in the world, a certainty that sits at your core and radiates outward regardless of what your bank account currently says. Think about people you've met who carry wealth consciousness. Not necessarily people with the most money, but people who have that quality of abundance about them. There's a naturalness to how they move through the world. There's a lack of grasping, no sense of desperation or scarcity. They expect good things to happen. They believe opportunities will appear. They trust that resources will be available when needed. That's not because they're naive or privileged or lucky. It's because their internal sun is burning with the frequency of abundance. Their identity is wealth, and everything flows from that. You, on the other hand, might have been living disconnected from that identity for so long that it seems distant now, maybe even impossible. You look at where you are financially and you think, how can I possibly embody wealth when I'm struggling to pay bills? You see the gap between your current reality and where you want to be, and it feels insurmountable. And so you keep operating from the identity of someone who's trying to get wealthy, someone who's working toward abundance, someone who's hoping things will change. But that identity, that trying identity, that hoping identity, it broadcasts a frequency of lack. And the universe receives that signal and sends back more situations that match it. The shift happens when you understand that you can change what's burning in your internal sun right now, today, regardless of your current circumstances. You can start embodying the identity of wealth before you have the evidence of it. You can begin vibrating abundance before your bank account reflects it. You can carry yourself as someone who's naturally magnetic to opportunities before those opportunities have appeared. This isn't delusion. This isn't pretending. This is recognizing that identity comes first and results follow, always, without exception. The people who build lasting wealth don't spend years striving and struggling until finally they get lucky and break through. They shift their identity first. They change what's radiating from their internal sun, and then, because reality has no choice but to reflect identity, their external world reorganizes itself to match the new frequency they're broadcasting. Comment, "My internal sun is shifting," if you're feeling that core identity beginning to change as you absorb these truths. There's a principle in nature that reveals everything you need to know about your potential for wealth. Think about a seed for a moment. A tiny acorn sitting in your palm looks like nothing special. It's small, hard, seemingly insignificant, but contained within that silent core is an entire oak tree. Not the potential for an oak tree if conditions are perfect, not the possibility of an oak tree if it gets lucky. An actual oak tree exists within that seed, in compressed, encoded form, waiting for the right conditions to unfold what's already there. That seed doesn't look around and ask for permission to grow. It doesn't question whether it deserves to become a massive tree. It doesn't worry about whether other seeds will judge it for reaching toward the sky. It doesn't doubt its worthiness or wonder if maybe it should stay small to be safe. The moment conditions align, soil, water, sunlight, it begins expressing what it already is. Growth isn't something it achieves. Growth is something it reveals. The tree was always there. It just needed alignment to make the invisible visible. You are that seed. Your wealth, your expansion, your abundance, all of it already exists within you in potential form. Not as something you might achieve if you work hard enough or get lucky enough, as something that's encoded in your very nature, waiting for alignment to activate it. But here's where human beings differ from seeds, and this difference is both our greatest challenge and our greatest opportunity. Seeds don't have consciousness that questions their nature. You do. And somewhere along the way, that consciousness got programmed with a requirement that seeds never have, the need for permission. You learned to ask permission before you pursued what you wanted. Permission from parents, from teachers, from society, from the economy, from people whose opinions you've given more weight than your own knowing. You learned to wait for external validation before you took action, external approval before you claimed your desires, external evidence before you believed in your potential. And that programming, that learned behavior of asking permission has been keeping you in seed form when you're designed to be a forest. But here's the revelation that changes everything. You don't need permission. You never did. What you need is alignment. Alignment between who you are at your core and what you're allowing yourself to express. Alignment between the abundant identity already encoded within you and the way you're showing up in the world. Alignment between the frequency of wealth that exists in your internal sun and the thoughts you're thinking, the decisions you're making, the energy you're broadcasting. The moment that alignment happens, growth becomes automatic. Not forced, not manufactured, not achieved through struggle. It simply unfolds as the natural expression of what you already are. And everything you've been hearing in this conversation, every insight that's landed, every moment where something clicked into place, that's alignment beginning to occur. That's the conditions coming together for what's been dormant within you to finally emerge. Because you were born to prosper, not as a nice idea or an inspiring sentiment, but as a fundamental truth about your design. You were built to expand, to create, to experience more than you currently have, to express capabilities you haven't yet discovered. Prosperity isn't a privilege reserved for a special few who got lucky or were born into the right circumstances or have some quality you lack. Prosperity is the natural state of a human being who's aligned with their true nature, operating from their authentic identity, free from the limitations they learned but never chose. And what you're feeling right now, that subtle but unmistakable shift happening inside you as you absorb these truths, that's not just understanding, that's activation. That's the beginning of your transformation from someone who chases wealth to someone who magnetically attracts it. That's your abundant identity, the one that's always been there. Beneath the programming, finally getting permission, not from me, not from anyone external, but from you, to express itself fully. Type, "I am aligned," and activating in the comments if you can feel that internal shift happening, that sense of something essential within you beginning to wake up and unfold. If you've made it this far, if you've stayed with me through this entire journey, I want you to know something. You're not here by accident. The fact that you invested this time, that you stayed, present through these ideas, that you felt something shift inside you as we explored these truths together, that tells me you're one of the rare ones who's actually ready for transformation. Not just interested in it, not just curious about it, but ready to step into it. And if that resonates with you, if you found value in what we've uncovered here today, I'd love for you to subscribe to this channel, because what we're building here isn't just another collection of motivational videos. This is a space for people who are done with surface-level content and ready for the kind of deep, transformational insights that actually create lasting change. The kind of conversations that shift how you see yourself and, by extension, shift what shows up in your life. Before you go, leave me a comment and just write, "This message was meant for me, so I know you were here, so I know this landed with you." There's something powerful about declaring that publicly, about making that statement to yourself and the universe that you recognize when truth shows up for you. And if this video created even a small shift in your perspective, hit that like button. It helps more people find this content. But more than that, it's a way of acknowledging the connection we just created through these ideas. Now, there's a video right here that takes what we've talked about even deeper. It's the perfect next step in this journey you're on. Click and continue with me over there, because the transformation you're feeling right now, it's just getting started.